Deuteronomy chapter 8 verses 2 to 3, and 14 to 16. He gave you a food unknown to you and your fathers. Moses said to the people, remember how for 40 years now the Lord, your God, has directed all your journeying in the desert, so as to test you by affliction and find out whether or not it was your intention to keep his commandments. He therefore let you be afflicted with hunger, and then fed you with manna, a food unknown to you and your fathers, in order to show you that not by bread alone does one live, but by every word that comes forth from the mouth of the Lord. Do not forget the Lord, your God, who brought you out of Egypt, that place of slavery, who guided you through the vast and terrible desert with its seraph serpents and scorpions, its parched and waterless ground, who brought forth water for you from the flinty rock and fed you in the desert with manna, a food unknown to your fathers. Both words, remember, and forget are very important in this chapter. Verse 2 to 3, remember how for 40 years now the Lord, your God, has directed all your journeying in the desert, so as to test you by affliction and find out whether or not it was your intention to keep his commandments. He therefore let you be afflicted with hunger, and then fed you with manna, food unknown to you and your fathers, in order to show you that not by bread alone does man live, but by every word that comes forth from the mouth of the Lord. It is good for all of us to remember the good and not to forget the bad that has happened to us in our lives. As we age, we discover that many of our problems were self-inflicted as a result of committing any of the 7 deadly or cardinal sins. 1. Pride. 2. Greed. 3. Lust, or inordinate or illicit sexual desire. 4. Envy. 5. Gluttony, which is usually understood to include drunkenness. 6. Wrath, or anger, and 7. Sloth, laziness. An example, the neighbor buys a new car, we become envious, so we decide to buy a new car but more expensive than the neighbor's. We committed the sin of envy, but we feel good because we have a new and more expensive car. Then the payment book arrives, and we must cut the food budget in order to make the payment. Would you do this again if the neighbor on the other side of your house were to buy a more expensive car than yours? Of course not. No reason to go hungry, is there? The point of the story is, every time we step away from God and his laws, we get ourselves in trouble, don't we? Though unpleasant, it's important to remember and never forget both successes and failures. Failures aren't necessarily a bad thing, sure they are at the moment, but you will learn and remember them, which will cause you not to do them again. Just like the Hebrews in the desert, we remember all the good that God has done for us. Just like the Hebrews in the desert, are we self-centered, or instead, God-centered? Just like the Hebrews in the desert, when we pray, do we pray for things we want God to do for us, or do we offer prayers of thanksgiving for the many blessings he has already given to us, out of his mercy and kindness? Just like the Hebrews in the desert, do we recognize that God is under no obligation to bless us, but he continually does so, because he loves us? In times of trial, we act just like the Hebrews. We are quick to ask God why he allows these trials to come into our lives, rather than to look at them as an opportunity for spiritual growth. The Hebrews were tested by God in the desert, and we are tested by God in our worldly experience. We are just like the Hebrews in the desert, aren't we? Like the Hebrews, we fail to understand that trials strengthen us and help us to grow spiritually and emotionally. The Hebrews were humbled by their need for water, but they came to understand that neither they, nor Moses could solve the problem on their own, so they were forced to recognize the need for God's help. Trials humble us, and we too often look to others for resolution instead of first asking for God's help. In this reading, Moses is urging the people to obey God, not out of fear but out of love. The Hebrew faithful, the humble, the trusting, were ones led to, and allowed to enter the promised land. Are we any different than they? As Jesus said, everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself exalted. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart, on your own intelligence rely not.